That's him right here. That's Allan Lichtman. Apparently, he predicts who's going to be president, and according to numerous sources, he has been right 10 out of 10 times, predicting who's going to win the presidential election. So, I don't know. Let's just watch the video first. Let's watch the video.
Another breaking development this morning. This in the race for the White House as the Nostradamus of presidential predictions is out with his pick finally for who will win the White House. And he's been right 9 out of the last 10 elections. The local historian making the national news right now, Allan Lichtman, joining us live with his choice and why he made that pick. Always a pleasure to talk to you. We've been waiting for this. We're not going to wait any longer. Let us know what you decided.
You know, my prediction system is unique. And as you said, it's been essentially right for 40 years. I would say 10 of 10, but I'm not going to relitigate 2000 here. And the way it works is it taps into the structure of how elections really work as votes up or down on the strength and performance of the White House party. And if 6 or more of my 13 factors go against the White House party, they're predicted losers. Otherwise, they are predicted winners. And I finally come to my final prediction and concluded that the White House party, the Democrats, now represented by Kamala Harris, would not lose any more than 5 keys. Thus, my prediction is Kamala Harris will be a precedent-breaking president of the United States, the first woman president in U.S. history.
Allan, when Kamala Harris took over as the top nominee for the Democrats, we talked about this, and you said at the time you wanted to be adamant that this was, you were not making your pick at that time. You're making your pick now. Did anything change, or was there anything that you were looking at specifically between when Joe Biden was leading the nomination and when Kamala Harris did?
Absolutely. First of all, was the fact that Democrats finally got a spine and got smart and united around Harris. That avoided the loss of the party contest key. They already lost one key, the incumbency key, obviously. But to lose both of them is a near fatal combination. So that made a huge difference. The other thing, I think, Harris has had a positive effect on a couple of other keys. I think she contributed to the fizzling of the RFK Jr. campaign, since voters no longer had to choose between 2 old white guys. Hate to say that, being an old white guy myself. And secondly, I think she contributed to the dampening of major protests because Biden, the policymaker, was no longer out front. So those 2 keys, social unrest, third party, and of course, party contest key, were critical keys that turned in favor of the incumbents. And remember, this is a prediction, not an endorsement. I've predicted about as many Republican as Democratic victories, including Donald Trump in 2016.
Based on your own history of predictions, Allan, for this time now, as we're now 2 months out, almost exactly, as to the election, could anything change that would impact those keys between now and Election Day?
Not since the Civil War has anything in the last 30 days changed a call. In the Civil War, we had the big Union victories very late. Does that mean it's impossible? No. I'm not so arrogant to say, nothing can change in history. There are 2 keys that are still very shaky that I've kind of split: the foreign military failure and success keys. It's conceivable, given how fluid wars are, and there are 2 wars going on, both of those keys could flip negative against the Democrats, but that would still, even in that dire scenario for Democrats, leave them down 5 keys, still 1 key short of a predicted defeat. That's why I said they really are in a position to lose a maximum of 5 keys.
Presidential predictor Allan Lichtman out with his prediction for this year, going with Kamala Harris based on his keys for the presidency. Allan, I appreciate you joining us this morning to make that news and to explain some of the background and research that goes into it. Thanks.
Harris.
All right, so this guy, Allan Lichtman apparently is he's a Harvard graduate, and he has a system that he uses to predict who's going to be the president after every election. And like you said, for 40 years, he has predicted correctly, so they say. Now, personally, this is my opinion. Okay, this is a different type of election. Okay, first we got a woman president that's in the lead of the Democratic Party. Then we got Trump, of course, controversial Trump. This is a different type of election. So, and the Democrats are fighting hard to make sure they remain control of not only the White House but the Senate, the Congress, so on and so forth. Right? They're fighting hard, and I'm talking about they fighting tooth and nail. They doing all kind of stuff, even stuff you're not supposed to be doing, to make sure that they not only keep the office, but keep Trump out of office. So I wouldn't be surprised if this is just one of them years that they gave this guy a lump sum of money and say, hey, man, I need you to sway voters this way by saying that you predict that Kamala is going to be the president. So, but again, let's talk about electoral votes, though. Let's talk about electoral votes. I really want y'all to understand how this actually works, because not understanding Electoral College votes will be the downfall of everyone's expectations. I just woke up. Expectations for this election. Okay, so let's go with the Electoral College votes. Let's see what the Electoral College votes are saying. Right
it's now. September. Labor.
No, that video's too long, so we're not gonna do that one. We're not gonna do that. Let's get a breakdown of Electoral College votes. Let's get a breakdown of that real quick, and y'all can look this stuff up yourself too.
If you watch the news during a presidential
All right, yeah, let's check this one out.
If you watch the news during a presidential election, you'll hear a lot of this.
What do the national polls look like?
Hillary Clinton's national lead. Nationally, Joe Biden is currently ahead.
But these national polls don't actually tell you who's going to win.
Throw the national polls out the window. They don't matter at all. What matters are those swing states.
Ah, yes, the swing states. Most democracies around the world elect their head of state with a popular vote, so whoever gets the most votes wins. But in America, we do it a little differently. The U.S. is the only country that picks its president using something called the Electoral College. It's made up of delegates from each U.S. state. When Americans vote for president, what they're actually voting for is who their state will vote for. This is why, every so often, someone wins the presidency without winning the popular vote. That's happened twice in just the past 20 years. The majority of Americans do not like the system, and haven't for a long time. Both political parties have made attempts to get rid of it. So why does the U.S. still use the Electoral College? And who actually benefits from it? The Electoral College is based on how people are represented in Congress, where each state has a number of representatives based on its population, and every state also gets 2 senators. So, for example, let's look at Texas, which has a huge population, and Vermont, which has a really small one. Texas has 36 representatives in Congress. Vermont only gets 1. Representatives in both states each represent roughly the same number of people. In the Electoral College, a state gets the same number of delegates as their congressional representatives, plus 2 for each senator. So Texas has 38 electoral votes, Vermont has 3. But this combination makes the number of people each delegate represents way different between states. In Texas, 1 electoral delegate represents 3 times the amount of people as 1 in Vermont. And that makes each individual person's vote in Vermont a lot more influential. The Electoral College creates discrepancies like this all over the country. A voter in Wyoming is worth 3.5 times as much as a voter in California. And the winner of the presidential election is the candidate who gets 270 or more of these Electoral College votes. These are the results of the 2016 election by state. You're probably more familiar with this version of it, a map of red states and blue states. But this chart tells a different story. You can see that no state is actually all red or all blue. But almost every state awards its electoral votes the same way. The candidate who gets the most votes in a state gets all its electoral votes. If they win the state by 1%, they win 100% of the electoral votes. In 2016, more than 4 million people voted for Donald Trump in California. In fact, more people voted for him there than in any other state except for 2. But it didn't matter. Hillary Clinton got more votes there, so she got all 55 of its electoral votes. Clinton never even campaigned in California. Polling showed she'd easily win the state. Trump only visited Texas once. He knew he'd basically have that state's electoral votes locked. But they both visited Florida 35 or more times. That's because Florida is usually a swing state. Polls show that the vote there could swing to one party or another nearly every election. Trump only won it in 2016 by 100,000 votes, out of more than 9 million. Swing states have changed over time thanks to shifting demographics and political views, and it's states like these where presidential candidates spend most of their time campaigning. It also means these states have way more influence over the election than these ones. A study found that voters in Michigan had 51 times the amount of influence on the 2016 election as someone from a state like Utah. Voters in states like California or Missouri mattered very little. Swing states are where the election actually takes place. They get the attention and the influence, and they only exist because of the Electoral College. It doesn't seem very fair, but the Electoral College has always shifted power away from some people and towards others. It was how it was designed. Back when there were just a few states, not 50, they had to get all the states to agree on the Constitution. One problem. The northern states, which were largely anti-slavery, wanted only free people to count in the population towards electoral votes, which they had more of. The pro-slavery southern states were worried that they would be constantly outvoted and wanted enslaved people to count in determining the population. As a compromise, they settled on something called the 3/5 Clause. It established that an enslaved person would only count as 3/5 of a person.
Y'all listen carefully now. An enslaved person only counts as 3/5 of a person. Listen.
In 1800, Pennsylvania, a northern state, and Virginia, a southern one, had about the same number of free people living there. But Virginia was also home to hundreds of thousands of enslaved people who had no freedom, let alone a vote, and ended up with more votes in the Electoral College than Pennsylvania. That year, those extra electoral votes gave the candidate from Virginia just enough to win.
So what does that mean? That means even slaves who are dead and gone, their votes count in Virginia. Go look it up. Slaves' votes count right now.
Even after the U.S. finally abolished slavery and eventually gave Black Americans the right to vote, white Southern leaders found ways to keep them from voting, like with discriminating laws like poll taxes and acts of violence. This meant they continued to have overrepresentation in the Electoral College on behalf of a large population that couldn't vote. The first time Congress attempted to replace the Electoral College with a simple popular vote was back in 1816. But senators from southern states blocked it, saying it would be deeply injurious to them. In 1969, Congress came even closer. Replacing the Electoral College had support in both parties, and even passed the House, but it was blocked again by southern senators. A senator from Alabama wrote, "The Electoral College is one of the South's few remaining political safeguards. Let's keep it. Why change a system that historically had, and still was, benefiting white Southerners?" Today, the states that the Electoral College benefits have changed, but it's still making some voters more powerful than others. If we look at the states with a lot of electoral votes for not a lot of people, and the states with a little electoral votes for a lot of people, these states are a lot wider and less diverse than the rest of America. And many of these states are Republican strongholds. These tend to vote Democratic. That's one reason the two most recent Republican presidents have won the Electoral College without winning the popular vote. And since it's currently Democrats that are primarily disadvantaged by the Electoral College, they're the ones leading the charge to replace it with a popular vote.
Get rid of the Electoral College and everybody.
But as politics have changed, the people most critical of the Electoral College have too. In the 1948 presidential election, New York ended up being the major swing state. A congressman from Texas said, "I have no objection to the Negro in Harlem voting, but I do resent the fact that his vote is worth 100 times as much as the vote of a white man in Texas." Swing states change. What doesn't is that the Electoral College gives certain people more power to pick the president. And its biggest defenders have always been those who benefit the most from it.
So, long story short, you don't vote for the president. You're actually voting for your electoral college in each state. So you're voting whoever your electoral college votes are in each state. That's who you're voting and letting them know that this is who you want to be president, because they are the ones who cast the actual vote for the president or represents the state for that president. So you're not actually voting per se for the president. You're voting to let your electoral colleges know this is who you want to be president. So that's the difference between the popular vote and the electoral college vote. The electoral college, the popular vote is just voting just to let the public know, hey, I want this president. The electoral colleges, they're the ones who vote and say, hey, this is who we're voting for because our popular vote is saying that this is who they want. That's how it's supposed to go. But we all know how politics and everything are. Anyway, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification button.